November 26, 1943. The skies above Bremen, Germany. Major Francis Gabby Gabreski lowers his pencil onto a half-filled logbook, his gloved hands still trembling from cold and adrenaline. He writes one line that will soon echo across every airfield in Europe. The Luftwaffe will learn to fear the dive. It was a sentence that marked the turning point of a war fought miles above the earth. Just 8 months earlier, few believed that the massive, overweight Republic P-47 Thunderbolt could ever survive in air combat, let alone dominate it. In early 1943, the air war over Europe was a slaughterhouse. American bombers flew deep into occupied France and Germany, but their escorts, short-range P-38s and Spitfires, could only protect them part of the way. Beyond that line, the bombers were alone, torn apart by Focke-Wulfs and Messerschmitts. When the U.S. Army Air Forces announced that their new long-range escort would be a 7-ton single-engine fighter, most pilots laughed. The P-47 looked less like a fighter and more like a flying milk bottle. It was thick, round, and heavy, almost too heavy. At full combat weight, it was nearly 14,000 pounds, 4,000 heavier than a Spitfire, and 3,000 heavier than the FW-190 it would face in battle. British pilots mocked it. American rookies feared it. They called it the Jug, short for juggernaut, and for months, even that nickname sounded ironic. But in a quiet corner of Republic Aviation's factory in Farmingdale, Long Island, an immigrant engineer named Alexander Kartveli had built something radically different. He once joked that his aircraft was a dinosaur with good proportions. What he had created was not a sprinter. It was a warhammer. The Thunderbolt was built around one of the most powerful piston engines of the Second World War, the Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp. 18 cylinders, 2,000 horsepower, each cylinder the size of a coffee mug and hotter than a blast furnace. But what made the P-47 unique wasn't just brute force. It was altitude. Deep inside its rear fuselage, Republic engineers had buried a complex network of ducts and turbines, AI, General Electric turbo supercharger, that used the aircraft's own exhaust to spin a turbine at over 20,000 revolutions per minute. The compressed air was fed back into the engine through intercoolers, allowing it to maintain full power at 27,000 feet. At an altitude where most fighters gasped for oxygen, the Jug still breathed freely. It was a marvel of engineering, but a logistical nightmare for maintenance crews. The system added hundreds of pounds, required extensive piping, and turned the rear fuselage into a maze of aluminum and heat shields. Yet this ungainly system would soon prove to be the secret weapon of the 8th Air Force. In January 1943, the newly formed 56th Fighter Group assembled in Bridgeport, Connecticut. Its leader was Colonel Hubert "Hub" Zemke, a meticulous tactician who believed discipline, not bravado, won dogfights. His pilots, among them Francis Gabreski, Robert S. Johnson, and Gerald W. Johnson, were mostly young, nervous, and skeptical. They'd trained for months on the P-47, but few trusted it. They called it slow to climb, heavy in turns, and clumsy in takeoff, one of them. Lieutenant Robert Johnson would later admit, "I thought I'd die in the first week of combat." But Zemke drilled his men relentlessly. He forced them to fly in tight formation, to climb high before every engagement, and to use their altitude as a weapon. He told them, "You don't fight the Germans. You strike them. Hit, climb, and hit again." It was a doctrine born from the lessons of energy fighting, using altitude and speed instead of tight turns to gain the upper hand. The Thunderbolt, with its enormous engine and sturdy frame, was built for exactly that. The pilots just didn't know it yet. April 13, 1943. The 56th Fighter Group flies its first combat mission, a fighter sweep over Saint-Omer, France. No enemy contact. The flight returns nervous but intact. It would take another 2 months before the group drew blood. June 12, 1943. Captain Walter Cook of the 61st Squadron spots a lone FW-190 below. He remembers Zemke's words, "Altitude is life." He rolls inverted, pulls the nose down, and dives. The heavy P-47 accelerates like a meteor, its 8 Browning .50 caliber guns armed and ready. Cook fires a short burst and the German fighter bursts into flames. It's the first confirmed kill for the 56th Fighter Group. The next day they claim 3 more. The skeptics begin to waver. For the first time, pilots realize this flying milk bottle can fall like a stone and rise like thunder. But the Thunderbolt's greatest secret was still unknown. discovered not in Europe but in a test range back in the United States. November 13, 1942. Lieutenants Harold Comstock and Roger Dyer take P-47Cs to 35,000 feet for a series of high-altitude test dives. They roll inverted and push the stick forward. The aircraft plunges 500 miles per hour. 600. The needle keeps rising. Then something terrifying happens. The controls freeze. The stick refuses to move. The aircraft dives straight down, unresponsive. Both pilots feel tunnel vision, their bodies crushed by gravity. At over 25,000 feet of altitude loss, they finally recover, barely 2,000 feet above the ground. They survive, shaken but alive. Republic Aviation claims that the pilots might have broken the sound barrier, a claim quickly silenced by General Hap Arnold himself. But what mattered wasn't speed. It was survival. Engineers realized that the P-47's thick wing design and strong frame allowed it to endure speeds that would destroy most other fighters. When they studied the data, one conclusion emerged. The Thunderbolt could dive faster, harder, and recover more safely than anything in the sky. It was the birth of the Thunderbolt's doctrine: boom and zoom. Dive, strike, and climb before the enemy can react. But speed without discipline could kill a pilot as easily as a bullet. Zemke's men learned that lesson the hard way. June 13, 1943. Lieutenant Robert Johnson scores his first kill, diving from altitude onto an FW-190 over France. He fires a precise burst and watches the enemy spiral into the ground. When he lands, he's congratulated by Major General Karl Spaatz himself, handed a bottle of scotch and warned never to lose formation again. Johnson had broken formation chasing his target and nearly paid the price. The rule became doctrine. Diving attacks required teamwork and discipline. The P-47 was a weapon, but only in the hands of a team that trusted each other completely. While Europe's skies burned, a quieter revolution was taking place in hangars and classrooms. Engineers taught every pilot how to recognize the onset of compressibility, how to hold the stick firm and wait as air thickened below 15,000 feet, and how to ride the dive instead of fighting it. The Jug was no longer just a machine, it was a philosophy of flight. By late June, the men of the 56th Fighter Group began to understand what they had. They had learned to trust the weight, to use gravity as a weapon, to turn a disadvantage into domination. Every time they climbed into that cockpit, they carried the same fear. But every time they returned, that fear turned into respect. The massive engine that once seemed sluggish became a shield. The armor that slowed them down brought them home alive. By the end of June 1943, the laughter about the flying milk bottle had gone quiet. The Luftwaffe was beginning to learn the same lesson Major Gabreski had written in his logbook months later. They would learn to fear the dive. The Jug had found its purpose. The men who doubted it had found their courage, and the skies over Europe were about to belong to the Thunderbolt. Winter 1943. The 8th Air Force has changed. The once cautious bomber escorts have become hunters. The pilots of the 56th Fighter Group now fly with quiet confidence. Their aircraft, once ridiculed, are now trusted partners, thick-skinned, thunder-voiced beasts that dive faster and hit harder than anything the Luftwaffe can throw at them. By mid-1943, the air war over Europe has turned into a brutal chess match. The Germans still control the skies over much of occupied territory. Every mission beyond the French coast is a risk. But something is changing in the rhythm of battle. The P-47s are climbing higher, diving steeper and striking with precision. The Luftwaffe's old tactics, turning fights and climb traps, no longer work. The Thunderbolt owns the vertical. On July 4, 1943, the 56th Fighter Group celebrates Independence Day not with fireworks, but with contrails. Gabreski leads his squadron across the channel in a formation so tight the wings nearly touch. Below, France lies like a gray, smoke-stained map. At 25,000 feet, they spot a swarm of FW-190s circling to intercept bombers. Gabreski gives one order: hit them from above. The sky explodes. The Jug dives with its trademark howl, 8 guns thundering in synchronized bursts. In seconds, 4 German fighters fall flaming through the clouds. When the Americans pull up, the remaining Luftwaffe formation scatters, unwilling to chase them into a climb. That day, Zemke's wolfpack, as the 56th would come to be called, proves that air superiority belongs to those who master energy. Not elegance, each mission teaches new lessons. They learn to roll inverted into dives to maintain visibility. They learn to break off before the enemy can force a low-speed turn. They learn to fight not with rage but with rhythm. By August, the 56th Fighter Group has claimed over 150 aerial victories. The Luftwaffe, once confident in its homeland defense, begins to feel the strain. German pilots report American fighters that appear from the sun and vanish before they can even react. They describe the sound of the P-47's guns as like tearing canvas and thunder mixed together. But for all its power, the Thunderbolt remains a brute. Its range limits the escort missions. It can protect bombers only part of the way to their targets. Deep inside Germany, the B-17s and B-24s still face slaughter. August 17, 1943. The Schweinfurt-Regensburg raid. 600 bombers take off in two great waves. Their targets, the ball-bearing factories of Schweinfurt and the Messerschmitt production lines at Regensburg. The Thunderbolts escort them only as far as the Belgian border. Beyond that, the bombers are alone. For 6 hours, the skies over Germany become a killing ground. 1 in 5 American bombers never returns. The Luftwaffe bleeds too, but the message is clear. Without long-range escort, the bomber offensive will die. Back in England, commanders look to the P-47 units for answers. Zemke proposes external drop tanks, fuel pods slung under the wings to extend range. Engineers at Republic and field mechanics improvise mounts, siphon lines, and jettison controls. By October, the Thunderbolt can reach deep enough into Germany to meet the bombers near their turning points. Now the hunters can stay longer. And the kill counts rise. One pilot's story becomes legend. Robert S. Johnson. On June 26, 1943, returning from a bomber escort, his P-47 takes heavy fire from ground-based flak. The cockpit fills with smoke. Instruments shatter and the canopy jams shut. His aircraft is crippled. As he struggles to control it, a German FW-190 dives on him. The enemy pilot, an ace named Egon Mayer, empties his guns into Johnson's Thunderbolt. Shells punch through the fuselage, rip through the wings, and ricochet inside the cockpit. Johnson ducks under his armor plate, blood in his eyes. His guns are silent. The German circles again, lines up for the kill, and fires everything he has. But the Jug doesn't die. Smoke trails from every seam, metal torn like paper, yet the engine roars on. After emptying his ammunition, Mayer salutes and peels away. Johnson limps across the channel, lands in England, and counts 201 bullet holes. His canopy finally opens, only after the ground crew pries it with crowbars. From that day on, no one doubts the Jug's toughness again. Throughout the summer and autumn of 1943, the Thunderbolt becomes the backbone of the U.S. fighter effort in Europe. New groups, like the 78th and 353rd, join the fight. Zemke's men teach them everything they've learned: altitude discipline, teamwork, and the art of the dive. Each squadron paints its cowlings and tails with bright colors: yellow, red, blue. Aerial recognition, yes, but also pride. To the bomber crews watching from below, those flashes of color mean salvation. The Luftwaffe responds with desperation. They send up their best, aces like Johannes Steinhoff, Wilhelm Galland, and Walter Dahl. For a time, the German fighters continue to strike hard, especially against unescorted bombers. But the Thunderbolts begin to hunt them. October 1943. A formation of P-47s crosses the Dutch coast on patrol. Below, a formation of Bf-109s rises to meet them. At 15,000 feet, they merge. Lieutenant Gabreski spots a Messerschmitt diving toward a bomber group. He rolls inverted, follows through the clouds, and pulls the trigger. The German explodes in a burst of orange light. Another climbs to intercept Gabreski's wingman. Gabby dives again, closing from above, and fires short, disciplined bursts. The 109 falls apart mid-air. Gabreski finishes the day with 3 confirmed kills. His call sign, Gabby, becomes synonymous with the P-47 itself. But the skies are unforgiving. Each victory carries a cost. Dozens of pilots are lost to flak, mid-air collisions, and mechanical failure. Zemke insists on endless debriefs, analyzing every mission to save lives. If you want to beat the Luftwaffe, he tells his men, you study it like a surgeon studies a body. By November, the results speak for themselves. The 56th Fighter Group alone has shot down more than 300 enemy aircraft, more than any other unit in the 8th Air Force. Their tactics are now being adopted across Europe. In one mission over Bremen, Gabreski dives through clouds at 600 miles per hour, Firing at two Fu-190s in line astern, his rounds tear through both before he even levels out. When he lands, his ground crew finds cracks in the wings from the stress of the dive. The Jug had survived another impossible flight. Meanwhile, the Thunderbolt's legend spreads beyond Europe. In the Mediterranean, P-47s of the 12th Air Force provide close support for troops in Italy. Their ruggedness and firepower make them ideal for ground attack. They dive into columns of tanks, trains, and artillery with surgical precision. Soldiers below begin calling them the angels with the silver wings. But the European theater remains the crucible. December 1943 brings new challenges. Winter fogs blanket the airfields. Ice forms on wings, radios fail, and missions vanish into snowstorms. Yet the Thunderbolt keeps flying. In one mission near Münster, Robert Johnson's flight encounters a formation of FW-190s above the clouds. Outnumbered 2-1, they climb into the sun. The Germans follow, right into the trap. The P-47s roll inverted, dive as one, and fire in perfect unison. In less than 30 seconds, 6 enemy fighters are destroyed. Not a single Thunderbolt is lost. By year's end, even German intelligence reports acknowledge the shift. Captured Luftwaffe officers describe the P-47 as unbeatable in a dive and almost invulnerable to damage. They begin advising new pilots to avoid combat with Jugs unless they have superior altitude. But altitude now belongs to the Americans. The 8th Air Force prepares for the next phase, the daylight bombing offensive deep into the Reich. The Thunderbolt will lead the way until its long-range successor, the P-51 Mustang, takes over. But the Jug story doesn't end there. Even after the Mustang's arrival, the Thunderbolt remains the soldier's aircraft, the one that brings you home, the one that takes punishment and keeps fighting. For the men of the 56th, 1943 ends with pride and exhaustion. They've survived months of relentless missions, freezing temperatures, and sky duels that lasted seconds, but felt eternal. Their barracks are filled with bullet-riddled flight jackets, chipped enamel coffee mugs, and the smell of engine oil that never seems to fade. In his logbook, Gabreski writes again, "We no longer fly to prove the Jug can fight. We fly to prove that we can." By the start of 1944, the 56th Fighter Group has destroyed over 500 enemy aircraft. They are the most successful American fighter group in the European theater. When the Mustang arrives, it inherits a sky that the Thunderbolt had already conquered. Even years later, when veterans gather to tell their stories, one memory repeats. The sound of that engine, the deep rolling growl of the R-2800 as it came to life at dawn, the vibration through the ground, the feeling that no matter what waited above the clouds, the Jug would bring you back. The Thunderbolt began as a machine no one wanted. Too heavy, too complex, too slow. But it ended the year as the most feared weapon in the sky. When the last mission of 1943 touched down in England, the ground crews lined the runways, waving as their pilots taxied in. Frost glistened on the canopies, engines idled down, and for a brief moment the airfields fell silent. The men looked at the dents, the bullet holes, the scorched paint, and smiled. The Jug had done its job. It had carried them through hell and brought them home. In the months to come, the Thunderbolt would dive on trains in France, smash tanks in Normandy, and chase the remnants of the Luftwaffe across the Rhine. But in the cold winter of 1943, before all that, it had already won the battle that mattered most, the battle for respect. The war would rage on. The skies would darken with new machines and new names. But for those who flew the Thunderbolt, there was only one truth that mattered. The Jug wasn't just a fighter. It was a promise. A promise that no matter how deep you dive, or how fierce the storm, you could always climb again.